Let me know if you can't hear me. Let me know if the you can't see anything. But there we go. So this is the third segment of the cyber kill chain series, um, and the segment is delivery. So just a brief overview again of the cyber kill chain developed by Lockheed Martin. Um, it's meant to simulate the attack life cycle that you see in the wild. Um, and obviously, each one of these phases can be expanded. Each phase will typically loop. Um, this is boiled down. It's meant to be simplified for a brief overview of an understanding when it comes to the type of attack life cycle you'll see. Um, Typically from an advanced persistent threat, not necessarily from just regular attacks. But so today, like I said, we're going over delivery. So delivery depends heavily on the recon that you performed, the weaponization that you performed. In that recon, you discovered the services, you discovered individuals, you found contact information, and then in weaponization, you've developed payloads, you've planned out attack paths, attack vectors, and primed your tools to uh, deliver the payload. And now you're at that phase, that point where it's time to deliver that payload. So we're going to talk about um, how the payloads are delivered, and it's not necessarily just payloads, but just even how the connection is made between the attacker and the victim server, and how what kind of tools there are out there for making that kind of a connection, ways that things get automated. Um, yeah, so let's get into it. Delivery. This picture just put together a bunch of random things I found on the internet, and it's got your spear phishing, your payload delivery from a bomber, login portals, because that's a classic. You clone a login portal. It's a classic way to steal someone's credentials, that kind of stuff. Okay, so what is delivery? You found that target, and now it is, and you've developed, a special payload for that target, or even just found like a payload that works for that target. It doesn't necessarily need to be special, but it just depends on the attack you're performing. So now you need to get it to that target. You need to deliver the payload. And that can be done so many different ways. And depending on what the payload is, depending on the nature of the attack, it can be performed in a number of different ways. So one of the most common ways and still most effective ways to deliver payloads, and it's almost annoying that this is the case because it seems cheap, but phishing, um, spoofing someone else's email, uh, jumping in, man in the middle, and intercepting people's email conversations and redirecting the conversation to your malicious email, and tricking them into clicking the wrong thing, tricking them into clicking, logging into the wrong portal, and stealing credentials, or potentially even getting them to execute malware on their end without even knowing it. Then there's vishing and smishing. Those are super funny words, but it's basically voicemail or just phone call. That's what phishing is, phone call phishing. So over the phone, that kind of stuff. And it's surprisingly easy to do that type of thing. You can just download apps on your phone to um, essentially spoof your phone number. So it just runs your phone number, redirects it through, a proxy. In essence, what would be considered kind of a proxy um, phone server type thing. And I'm oversimplifying the crap out of it, but just for the sake of the presentation. It's a similar idea with smishing, so you can do spoofing of text messages and that kind of thing, mass texting to victims to do the same thing as what phishing would be. And then there's like drive-by downloads. So drive-by downloading is requires no user interaction. So they've already, they click on a website, they go to it, and then the website automatically downloads malware to their computer. That's kind of the definition of a drive-by download. That's a delivery mechanism, right? So it's a payload delivery mechanism. I would say drive-by downloads aren't very common these days. It's a lot of web browsers are designed to to mitigate this type of attack. But I don't know. Maybe at the end of this meeting, we can talk more about these different mechanisms and what we've seen. Another payload delivery mechanism is infected software. So you'll see that a lot in typically like file sharing or pirated software. That's usually where you'll see infected software. You'll also see it in websites that have been compromised, and so that's kind of one of the important things about checking the hash of software, because the original hash, if it's changed, if the software you've downloaded is different from the original hash of that software, then there's an indicator that it's potentially infected software. But that's in a whole nother conversation too. Because what if the attacker put a different hash on the website? Then how are you going to trust that, right? So there's got to be some kind of place that you can go to find trusted hashes. But anyways, okay. Malicious browser extensions, right? A lot of web stuff, but the web browsers have gotten better over the years, so they're better at stopping ads from delivering malware to your computer. Infected mobile apps. So you hear about this all the time. Like the Android store will clear out like 300 apps that they found to be malicious, etc. Oh yeah, and I already mentioned torrenting and that kind of stuff. So there you go. So another topic I kind of wanted to get into was that delivery can be detected. So in unencrypted network traffic, your firewall is gonna, depending on what kind of inspection the firewall has, it's gonna drop packets that contain malicious data. But and it'll also drop packets that are coming from or going to known bad domains or IP addresses. So I don't know if there's entire databases out there that contain IP addresses that belong to known botnets or um, I don't know, Russian hackers and that kind of stuff. And so those are flagged, and good firewalls will be able to recognize that this packet's coming from or going to a known bad IP address or domain, which both of those can be extremely disposable, but it's the first step, right? So firewalls are in place, antivirus is in place to um, basically be that um, first line of defense. So when I talked about like antivirus, let's say you download a piece of software onto your computer. Well, like there's signatures, like software signatures that are generated by like hash algorithms and that kind of stuff. Um, and those signatures are stored in databases of known malware. Like VirusTotal keeps a really huge database of known malware. Um, and a lot of antivirus providers will share known malware across each other, and so in the downloading of whatever file, a lot of antivirus will kick in if they recognize anything malicious being downloaded and just stop it before it even gets fully downloaded. And I'm sure we've all encountered that. So delivery can be detected, and that might be kind of vague, but that's kind of the trick to this whole kill chain. Is how a lot of these different phases blur together. But so, if it can be detected, well, a lot of these guys need to, these attackers, they need to obfuscate. They need to hide their payloads. Um, and in a lot of cases, attackers will go to pretty extreme lengths to hide their payloads. Um, it's that in and of itself is probably one of my most favorite topics to get into is the way that hackers write malware and obfuscate the delivering of a payload to the target or victim. Um, it's super fascinating just how complex it can get, how layered the attack can become, and I guess what I mean by that, and we will get into more of this too, because obviously it's a decently sized presentation. But for example, an attacker, the actual payload itself that gets delivered to you might not be the agent that they use to control your computer, but it might be a downloader that then downloads the actual command and control agent into the memory. So the payload that you get is some disposable payload that's just gross and complex with just all kinds of dynamically generated um, filler code inside of it just to confuse dynamic and static analysis, um, and also to throw off known file signatures. And that's a really easy thing to do as well too, because if you're a script kiddie, you might not really have the competency to um, change the file signature, but if you know anything more than a script kiddie, then you'll probably be able to figure out how to change the file signature. Um, Adding a couple extra bytes to the file can be all it takes to change that file signature. Uh, but then there's those more stateful, I don't know if stateful is the right word, but the more complex antivirus that can watch behaviors and tell that, okay, this thing's pinging, a number of domains as soon as it started up. Well, that could potentially be a malicious behavior, depending on what the function of the program is, et cetera, et cetera. So, anyways, I thought that was interesting to talk about. So more on delivery detection. Um, because delivery often involve, the art of delivering your payload often involves the computer network. Um, IP addresses, URLs, phone numbers, email addresses. Um, those are what's being examined to detect a malicious delivery. So there's tons and tons of databases out there that contain known bad IP addresses, URLs, phone numbers, email addresses. Some people might even geo block, depending on if a country is known for having a lot of malicious activity. Like um, you might you might not be ever getting any phone calls from Russia because your phone provider is just dropping them because they know that you're not supposed to be getting phone calls from this or that. That's just one example. It's probably bogus, but that's just an example of you know a, a, a system in place to help mitigate that type of attack. Um, so attackers will often try to obfuscate the originating IP address, which is something so easy to do. We already talked about disposable IP addresses and IP resource pools that attackers can pull together to send their payloads from, and they could be sending it right from their battle station, and they just make sure to send it through 3 or 4 different machines before it gets to the target, and that way now it doesn't come from a malicious IP or a known bad. Or same idea with the URL, but that can get a little more complex. But if you there's resources you can go to buy, because I don't know. Let's say this victim has a strong antivirus system that can tell that that's a malicious URL. We're not going to download. We're not going to let you download from there. Well, let's say that this attacker starts or buys a new domain and tries to deliver the payload from that domain. Well, if it's a good AV, it might be able to tell, like, okay, well, there's no history behind this URL. It was just generated like 20 minutes ago, so we're just not going to trust it because that's too much of a coincidence, right? So you can set those kinds of policies in place on good endpoint detection and response programs, EDR systems on endpoints. So what an attacker will do to get around that, because again, this is just a big game of cat and mouse. An attacker will, there's websites where you can buy expired domains that have a history, and so now you re-register that expired domain, and all of a sudden you've got a website with a history, and that more sophisticated EDR will think it's a known and good website, and there you go. Now it's a trusted website. So it's interesting. It's interesting the kinds of things that attackers will do to get around the detection methods. And this game goes on and on and on. And it can get annoying, but it can also be fun if you're the attacker. So I called this advanced phishing because I would say the easy phishing would be like you get a list of IPs, and calling phishing easy is kind of silly because it's it's like conceptually easy because it's just sending emails, but doing it the right way can be kind of hard. Um, but you pull together a whole bunch of email addresses from the target organization or the individual, and then you just do a mass phishing campaign with legit coming from a legit looking email address or a spoofed email address to make it look like it's coming from internally. If the victim doesn't have a properly configured mail server or that type of thing, then they won't be able to tell that it didn't come from within. And I looked it up, and apparently, like 42% of mail servers on the internet are not configured properly. And apparently, you can do that just by throwing crawlers out there. So the more advanced phishing technique would be spear phishing, and that's why I put that picture in the slide. Um, Spear phishing is when you get that target and you perform a more sophisticated phishing attack. McEwen University experienced one of those back in, I think it was 2017 or something like that, where an attacker managed to get in the email chain between one of the departments and an outside contracting company. And the attacker had been watching that email chain for a while. And then when the time was right, the attacker jumped in and said, as the contracting company, hey, you have an outstanding bill, our banking information changed, send it to this one instead. And then the McEwen fell for it and paid the attacker. And so there's more to that story. Most of us here have heard that already, but it's pretty interesting. And so, when a mail server is not configured properly, you can do interesting things like um, impose new kinds of forwarding rules that will forward the emails to you or to the attacker, or you can reconfigure the way existing emails are set up so that um, all emails that were sent to that person are now sent to you, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting what can happen with a misconfigured email server. And apparently most of them are close to half of them are not configured properly. So actually, hold on. I think I might have said something about how um, there's kind of a drawback to mail servers because apparently implementing the authentication for that mitigates spoofing emails or allowing spoofed emails to come through. Apparently, those methods are kind of tricky and time consuming to implement, and that's why they're not there half the time. So I don't know if that was interesting to hear or not, but anyway, so defenses, obviously your firewalls are one of the first lines of defense, and it drops known bad packets. If it can see that the stuff within is malicious, it's going to drop it. Um, and there's other things you can put in place to drop packets, anyways. Like if you know that shouldn't come through, and you're not expecting that kind of network traffic. And similar to your email, those mechanisms I was talking about that need to be put in place are SPF and DKIM and DMARC. And DMARC is a combination of SPF and DKIM. And so if you want to know more about those, I say just look them up because they're pretty important to know if you're going to get into email phishing. Web browsers. So I talked about it a little bit. Web browsers are getting better for protecting the end user. Most web browsers these days are sandboxed. So if anything does go wrong inside the website, when you visit a website, it's not going to get out of your browser most of the time. And that's pretty important because it seems like 95% of what people do on computers involves a web browser. It seems like we're always using them. So it's a good thing that they're used, that they're getting better, because in the past it was so bad. You'd click a flipping link on the side of the page, and next thing you know, your whole desktop background would change and all your this or that would lock up. And it was brutal. I don't know if you guys remember that, but or you download one thing and all of a sudden you'd have 12 different. Oh, I should have got a picture of that, but you'd get like 12 different, what did they call those? Tools? Additional tools on your toolbar. It was brutal. But thankfully things have gotten better. Cookies got so bad at one point that they were basically like malware. And lately it's been extensions. So browser extensions have been kind of the ugly thing. So you really got to be careful what browser extensions you're trusting. And beware, right? Because those 0 days, you never know if there's a 0 day that's there always is 0 days that are undiscovered, but who knows if an attacker has discovered it and is exploiting it and is getting us. So just always be on the lookout when you're using the internet, right? Okay, more delivery mediums, email attachments, infected software. I kind of talked about this before, but maybe it's important to touch a little bit on what to look for in a malicious email attachment. So if you're looking at email and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is infected or not. If the attachment is like a .exe and you didn't ask for a .exe or any of these really, these are most of the known bad extensions that should not be on your email extension. So a .exe, a .com, a .docum, .iso, .dll, like those are just why. Um, but then even then, if you're getting a docx, it could potentially be infected. There was a recent 0 day that was pretty bad that had to do with I don't know if it was email extension specifically, but the Microsoft suite. Microsoft doesn't put a whole lot of time into securing their products. They put more into developing it. Um, PDFs could potentially be infected, so just be careful. Um, if you're really not sure, you throw anything you have through VirusTotal, and it'll tell you if it's good or bad. Infected software. So because we're an ethical hacking club, I have to say, don't ever download cracked software. Don't torrent software because you're very likely just downloading a botnet agent onto your computer. And if you're really unlucky, you'll get a password stealer. One of my buddies was doing that. He downloaded a game off like Pirate Bay or something like that. And that week, he couldn't buy anything anymore because his cards were locked and he got declined and stuff. And he checked. He went to the bank and they were like, dude, all your money is gone. And his credit cards got maxed out and his Steam account got stolen. And he traced it all back to the the torrent he downloaded off of Pirate Bay. So if you're gonna do that stuff, be careful, man. You never know what you're getting. Um, so yeah, and then web pages. Be careful, right? If you're downloading something, check the hash. I know it's a pain, but you never know. You hear those horror stories. Okay. This was a really interesting one. So, physical delivery mediums. So the physical aspect of it. Um, um, so we talked a lot about digital delivery, over the network or over, email, that type of stuff, just technically through the network. Um, I know I just used Pirate Bay as an example. There's a few others out there. So rubber ducky. This is pretty cool. Apparently Flipper does pretty much anything all these do. Just pretty cool. The
Flip is
multi-tool.
amazing, just saying.
Oh, do you have a flipper?
I don't have one. I want one, but like some of the reviews are like they're kind of mixed, but it's a toy novelty.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
definitely wanna I want one for sure.
It's a toy, but you can legit do some pretty gnarly things with it. I'll
Yeah, you could like lift up like parking garage gates and stuff, like
yeah.
those you can capture stuff. It's basically like replay attacks, right? Like capturing
Yeah.
the RF code. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yep. Exactly, man. And apparently the flipper acts as a rubber ducky as well. My one of my colleagues was telling me about that and said it's better than rubber ducky. So keep that in mind, I guess. This is coming from a guy with
Mhm.
20 years of industry experience. Um, so the rubber ducky, if you don't know what it is, it's basically a USB that's had its firmware redone so that when you plug it into a computer, the computer thinks it's a wireless keyboard or something like that. And then from there, if you plug in a keyboard, your computer's not like, should I trust this device? Your computer just automatically trusts it because it says it's a keyboard, right? Well, hackers went ahead and were like, I'm going to take advantage of that, and they made the rubber ducky. That was kind of the one of the younger versions of that attack. And so that's how it works from a really high level. And then from there, it delivers the payload to the machine, and I've never been able to try it because these things are always out of stock and they cost upwards of $200. So I'm a broke student. I can't afford that. Anyways, that's pretty cool. The other thing you see there is called the LAN turtle. Apparently, you just plug that in and you plug the Ethernet into the other end and plug the other end into the computer. And it not only acts as a network sniffer, but it also acts as a backdoor to the computer. Now, I don't know how that works. I haven't been able to do too much research on it, but apparently it gives you a backdoor shell into the computer. Um, so I'd look into it. It might be really interesting, might pique your fancy. But another thing I put there, it doesn't have a link attached to it, but it's card skimmers and scanners. Now, I have no respect for that stuff at all. That is only designed to steal your credit card, and people that do that are that's brutal, man. I hate that. So card skimmers and scanners, see them on gas station pumps. There's always those famous Reddit videos where someone yanks a scanner or a skimmer off of the gas station pump, and everyone starts oohing and awing. Um, so then there's that. So sometimes, I guess that's not necessarily a payload delivery, the skimmers and scanners, but I just figured I'd put it in here because it kind of has to do with physical hacking. And then there's your pineapple. I didn't post a link to that, I guess. But the pineapple, that's what this is right here. It's another product by these guys. These top three up here are made by Hack5. So pineapple is a malicious Wi-Fi router. And really you can turn like not any router, but the right router you can turn into a malicious Wi-Fi router, or just a malicious router. But the pineapple's designed from the ground up to be a malicious Wi-Fi router. So you can use it to do all kinds of things. Evil twin attack, et cetera, et cetera. I would look it up. These are cool gadgets, like Nemi was saying. They're fun. And, while they're fun, they can be used for some pretty malicious things. The flipper, Nemi was talking about how that thing can be used for replay attacks. My buddy sent me a video from his buddy where he cloned his girlfriend's RFID card for her apartment building and was able to get into the building and then her apartment with the flipper. So that's creepy as heck, but that's the kind of thing that tool can do. And you
I
can make
actually
it.
did that with my apartment key as well. I used a software-defined radio to capture the code.
Oh,
I
that's so
haven't I
cool.
haven't re- I haven't replayed it back yet, but
You should try it out, man. So essentially, when you look at the flipper, it looks like a pretty custom tool, but all that really is just a board inside of it. Like imagine a Raspberry Pi board, and they put a fancy case around it. So that's kind of what it was from the get go, was a Raspberry Pi or something that looked like a Raspberry Pi, like one of those micro boards. And then they programmed it to have all these features and functionality. And it had RFID and IR, so it had radio frequency modules on it and stuff. So on that note, if you look to the right, you see Proxmark 3. That's another RFID tool. It doesn't do I know I put RF there, but I meant to put IR for Flipper. So I apologize for that. But the ProMark 3 only does RF. It doesn't have IR, but that's kind of one of the predecessors to um, the Flipper. But it's also apparently really good. Okay, but then in the wild, you might see. Oh, that's where I put malicious Wi-Fi hotspots. So the pineapple, the link for that is the malicious Wi-Fi hotspots. So I talked about that a little bit, but you also might get rogue cell towers. It's a lot harder to do. It requires a lot more gadgets. It requires a GSM, all that kind of stuff. Um, and I'm sure there's a lot more tech involved because this is not your consumer hacking. Um, but you also get police that are able to make rogue cell phone towers through stingrays, um, which they use as like a mobile cell tower to capture cell phone traffic. Um, so it was cool. I was talking to my colleague about rogue cell towers, and he was telling me that you can use apps on your phone to gather and parse nearby cell tower information to pinpoint where the nearest cell tower is. And he wrote an app on his phone that would estimate if there was a Stingray tower in the vicinity, because apparently cell tower data doesn't change or not the data, but the location of stuff of them, they don't change very often. So he was able to check like the data. Now this is me not really like explaining it very well, but he's able to compare the logs, and if there's a tower nearby that wasn't there until very recently, it could very likely be a Stingray. So take that for what it's worth, but it might be interesting for you to hear. Okay, so now we're getting into the tool suites. Everything we talked about today has all kinds of everything we talked about today has all kinds of tools involved for it. Depending on what you want to do, what the payload is, what the attack kind is, because we talked about tons of stuff. We talked about physical attacking. We talked about emails, phone calls, actual payloads to exploit vulnerable services. So that's why I have a few different services or a few different tools in here. But 3 of them are involved with phishing. The SCT, the social engineering toolkit, is more involved with more general, but it's more command line, so it's trickier to navigate. But if you're a command line hero, then no worries. Go Fish. These top 3 are open source. Metasploit has a paid version, but it also has a community version, so you'll see it on every release of Kali Linux. Cobalt Strike is entirely paid, but that thing's insane, and you'll see a lot of malware in the wild built using Cobalt Strike tools. It's like a GUI malware builder, essentially. So it's kind of the lazy hacker's way of building effective malware. SET, I'm going to show you guys that a little bit today. I'm also going to show you Go Fish. I was trying to get Sniper Fish to work, but that thing's annoying as heck, so I don't recommend trying it out. But if you really want to configure a whole bunch of things, then try out Sniper Fish. Go Fish is easy. You just download it and run it just like that. And I'll show you guys. SET is just as simple as download and run as well. Metasploit's already on Kali Linux. Don't even need to download and run it. Cobalt Strike, just look into it. It's kind of cool. Okay, so like I said, mini demo, and then we can have a little chat and talk about the cool things about hacking after this. So, yeah, so I'll start with social engineering toolkit. So you usually just git clone this to your computer, and then run your in this case, I think it has it set up .py. I think you have to do Python 3. Anyways, semantics. So you run the requirements thing. It's going to set up all the background information, and then I think you have to go sudo toolkit, and then it starts it up. So this is a social engineering toolkit. It's all command line, but it's pretty nifty. But like when it comes to mail, phishing, email phishing, you're gonna have to set up the mail server that's in here, or if you already have like a mail server you're paying for that's like $1 a month or something like that, then you just enter the credentials into the social engineering toolkit. I think that's in item 5 here. Just do that, or maybe not. Anyways, you're supposed to be able to set it. I don't use set, so I'm just showing you guys it a little bit. So you hit 1, and you're going to be able to set up your different attack vectors. You've got spear phishing, website attack. You can generate infectious media with it. You can create a payload and a listener. So a lot of these different, they call them exploit kits. It's not just, this isn't just a social engineering toolkit, but it's also considered an exploit kit. So you're able to generate payloads with it. But with any kind of open source payload generator, you might have to do some configuring to make those payloads undetectable. And then, give it a month, now that thing will be thrown into another one of those databases. So you'll have to generate a new payload soon. Like, With the different pen tests that I'm involved with, we usually have to end up generating new payloads almost every time we deploy, even though we're obfuscating our payloads and running it through the different obfuscators and stuff. We still have to generate new ones. So that's another interesting thing to think about. But yeah, there's plenty of different interesting attack vectors that you can use through a social engineering toolkit. Look into it. It's cool, um, extensible, and that's it for that. Sorry, I can't demonstrate it right now, but okay. So Go Fish. This one's another interesting one. So you just run it, and then in this case, we'll go to Firefox. I always run it in a private window for the sake of cookies, like when the websites don't rely on stored caches. So we'll go localhost 3333 because that's where this one is. That's where this one is located. We'll accept the risk. Okay, so here's Go Fish, and I need to grab the password for this module. Open folder. I think I stored my creds in plain text, so you guys can mock me as much as you want. I'm gonna paste that. Awesome. So this is what Go Fish looks like. It's probably the most script kiddie friendly phishing platform you'll ever find. It's really convenient to use. You start your campaign in here. You the users and groups is the group that you're going to set up. That's your target, right? So you'll compile it separately, compile your list of victims separately, and then you bulk import. But if you want, you can do it all by hand if you like to torture yourself. Email templates. So this is going to be the template of your attack. It's going to automatically populate the different variables that you set in the template because it needs to be dynamic, right? It needs to look like it's come from Google or it's come from Microsoft or Twitter or whatever attack vector you're using for this phishing campaign. The landing page will be when they click the link inside the page or inside the email, where is it going to send it, right? So you have to design your landing page. And when I say design, like, sure, you can design it if you want, or you can go online and use another tool to clone a web portal or a web page. You could request a password reset from Twitter and then clone what that page looks like, and then write your own script into that page and then put the template here so that that's the way it's used. And your sending profile. So this is who the from field essentially. So when you click it, you have to configure the name for the profile. And in this case, you can't change it because this is a mail thing, right? So it's an SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. It's coming from what domain or what email address, and then the host. This is the email host that you're sending it from. So GoFish is going to connect to it and then redirect the email from that host. This is the server, the actual mail server. That's why you can't just use Gmail for this type of thing. You actually have to set up a mail server or use a paid one online somewhere. Username for the username for the email server, password for the email server. If you get the certificate errors, like it says here, could expose you. And then you can customize the header, that type of stuff. And then if you need to test your configuration, you just hit the send test and send it to some destination. Make sure that your sending profile works. And then account settings is just basically like the Go Fish account settings and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there it is. That's Go Fish in a nutshell. I tried to get it set up, but as I said before, getting your email server set up it's easier said than done. You want to do it at home. Good luck. I wish you well. It's possible. A lot of people do it, but it's also kind of hard and it's not beginner friendly. So there's Go Fish, and I think I might have said I was gonna demonstrate another one. I think I'll just show you Metasploitable or Metasploit. So I've shown you this before, but MSF console is where you go on Kali Linux. You just type that in, and it'll load up the Metasploit framework. That's what MSF stands for. It's Metasploit framework. So there is a ton of crap you can do with this. So the only reason why this is relevant to the delivery phase of um, the attack life cycle is because Metasploit will deliver the payload for you in the case of a vulnerable server. So you can straight up connect to, like, I don't know, use um oh, there's a ton of possibilities. I don't know if you're using like auxiliary. This is more for scanning usually when you're using auxiliary, but use exploit. Yes, let's view all those. So there's tons and tons and tons of different exploits that you can use, but you select your the thing you want to exploit. Linux, there's 370 exploitations for it. Let's do an HTTP thing because that's what we see. So yeah, you find the thing you want to exploit. You select the payload um, that you or the exploit that it has built in. Um, you're usually going to go show options, and these are the different things you need to configure in this case. So our host is the remote host. That's the IP address or the domain that you're going to connect to, and that Metasploit is then going to deliver the payload to. Um, that's the nice thing about MSF, man. You just type in the stuff, and then once it's done, you just type in exploit, and it does it for you. But in this case, I didn't set anything, so it's not going to do it. But that's why I included MSF console Metasploit in there. There it is. That is a brief rundown on the delivery phase of the cyber kill chain as developed by Lockheed Martin. And thanks for coming.